Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Did you grow up with that phrase? What do you think about it? Yeah. It's an absolute load of rubbish, and I don't have the clicker. I don't know about you, but I think that's a big fat lie. And as Jenna said, I have been in a few helicopter crashes. In fact, one not very far from here in the Wye Valley, just about 10 miles from here. I have been mortared and I have been shot at. And I would take any of those over being called names. And that's not me being glib about being shot at, by the way. We all know that there are people out there right now who are under fire. And that's heartbreaking. So I say this with the greatest of respect to our fellow human beings when I say that I find rejection more frightening than being shot at. In fairness, part of that might be due to the fact that the first time I got shot at, I thought it was fireworks. I was in Iraq and I saw tracer fire going through the sky, and we punched out flares. They do look a bit like fireworks, don't they? Don't you think? And as one does when we see fireworks, I went, oh. But then I realised, wait a minute, someone's shooting at me. And if I'm honest, the first emotion that I experienced was excitement, because this was everything I'd ever trained for. But then it struck me, actually, these people are trying to kill me. That's really unfriendly. But it wasn't from a sense of indignation, actually. I remember thinking, wow, these people really don't want us in their country. And I think that's interesting because it wasn't the risk to my personal safety that stayed with me and that stopped me in my tracks. It was the feeling of not being liked. That's what really struck me. And I wonder if that's what the Russians might be thinking right now. And whatever we think about what is happening out there, we are all human beings, without exception, and we all experience rejection. And some of us feel a great deal of fear about rejection. I mean, let's be honest, it's lonely being speakers, isn't it? So if you've battled with it, then I've got good news, because I'm going to share with you how it's possible not just to change your relationship with that fear of rejection, but also rejection itself. And not only can we, but I believe we should, because I believe it makes us better leaders, better followers, and it strengthens our relationships. So I've had a lot of experience at being rejected. It may surprise you to know that I wasn't the cool kid growing up. Would you have been friends with that? Look at me. My brother loved me, though. But I wasn't the cool kid growing up. And then I decided to join the Air Force, which was and still is mostly males. And whether you like it or not, I looked different, I sounded different. So, I was a bit lonely at times. But also, the Air Force survives on banter. And sometimes it can be quite hard-hitting. And I remember the experience that really kind of hit me the hardest was right at the end of my career, when I was out in Afghanistan, in Kabul, and I was the leader of a detachment of 120 people. And our mission was to fly these Puma helicopters around Kabul and the local area to get people safely from A to B. So I was in charge of all of these people at Christmas, as the photograph indicates. But I was also flying missions at the same time. And on no particular day, I was flying into a very familiar landing site. And we always fly as a pair in Afghanistan and Iraq so that if we get into trouble or get shot down, someone can come and get us. So I was following very closely behind the number 1 aircraft, and I hit a bit of their downwash, and my aircraft started to fall out of the sky. So I pulled in the lever, which is the thing that makes you go up in a helicopter. And nothing happened, just kept sinking. So I pulled in a bit more, still falling out of the sky. So I had to kind of pull it up to my armpit, at which point I arrested the rate of descent and we made a safe landing on that landing pad that you can see there. And when I got on the ground, the co-pilot turned to me and he said, "You've just overstressed the aircraft. You pulled too much power." And I couldn't be sure, but he sounded a bit annoyed. And I remember registering that as, he thinks I messed that up. Anyway, I don't know who's seen Top Gun. Raise of hands who's seen Top Gun. Top Gun 2 is coming out. Yes. By the way, everyone who's joined the Air Force has joined because of that film. If they tell you otherwise, they're lying. But you may remember that there's a scene in it when Kelly McGillis says to Tom Cruise, "What were you thinking in that moment?" And he says, "If you think, you're dead." Well, it's kind of true. When you're flying a mission, you can't dwell on what's happened. You have to get on with it, much like speaking. So I did. I carried on flying the mission, no mishaps. And I didn't think about it again until I got back to Kabul International Airport, and I was coming into my normal parking spot. And as I brought the aircraft to a stop, my thoughts returned to this comment. And I remember feeling quite aggrieved. Anyway, when you bring the Puma to a stop, you put the toe brakes on, and then you pull in a parking brake, which is a bit like a handbrake in a car. But this is a 40-year-old aircraft, so there's a bit of a knack to getting things done, and you have to kind of hoik it up and twist it into place. So I did this, and I may have used slightly more vigour than normal on account of being a bit aggrieved at this comment, which would have been fine if it had been the parking brake, but it was the lever, the thing that makes you go up in a helicopter. So we cartwheeled 30 feet into the air. And the Puma's renowned for being quite skinny and top heavy. So it falls over quite easily. So I think we all imagine now that we were going to topple over and thrash ourselves to death. Fortunately, we landed back on all 3 wheels, at which point my co-pilot turned to me again and said, "What happened there?" And I realised I'd been so busy wondering about what he thought of me that I had nearly killed us. So I walked back in to do the debrief, and one of the guys came up to me and said, "Are you okay, boss? You've had a bit of a shaky experience there?" And I said, "Yes." And I mustered as much dignity as I could, and I went, "Yes, I am absolutely fine to fly." And this tear just came from nowhere. And I could just see 120 people look at the floor and start sort of shifting awkwardly in their seats, like, "She's crying. What do we do now?" So anyway, I gathered myself together, and I went flying that night, and all fine. And I promised myself that after that, I wouldn't show that kind of emotion again. Because I know there's a lot of stuff out there about being vulnerable as a leader, and I'm all about that. But there is a time and a place for it. And we were in a war zone at Christmas, and I really wanted to be that supportive, strong boss that I felt they deserved. And I was also separated from my young child, and it was the first time I really understood what it meant to be separated from loved ones, and I understood that wrench that I'm sure we can all identify with over the last couple of years. So I felt very strongly that it was my job to be strong for everyone and to channel that knowledge so that I could support others. And by and large, I thought I did a pretty good job. When I got back, I discovered that I had earned myself a nickname, and that they called me Jekyll and Hyde. And I was gutted about this. And I've been called lots of names in my RAF career, and some of them are way worse and not for polite company. So in some ways, it shouldn't have bothered me. But I think it was the timing of it, because I was going through quite a tough time personally after I got back from Afghanistan. And I had confided in a couple of trusted agents, and they knew the full extent of what was going on. And I felt like my life was a bit of a car wreck at that point. And I discovered that one of these trusted agents had been responsible for proliferating this nickname, if you like. So I felt quite betrayed. And I remember thinking, I don't understand. I've worked so hard all my career to be the best pilot, the best leader, the best beer drinker, the best at pull-ups, so that you would all like me. And then when I need you the most, you've kind of turned against me. Well, that's what it felt like. And I couldn't work out what I'd done to deserve this coldness, I suppose, when what I really needed was for people to be gentle with me. And the only logical conclusion that I could come up with was that I must be a monster. Now, obviously, if you start thinking like that, you're going to go downhill pretty quickly. So I knew I had to do something about this. So I tried some cognitive behavioral techniques where you identify what the thought is, and then you challenge and replace it with something more helpful. So in this instance, it might be, okay, the thought is, I've been rejected because I'm moody. So, okay, well, maybe there's some other evidence out there. Maybe they've said some nice things about me that I haven't heard about. Or maybe I'm not as moody as they're saying. But the problem is that I couldn't escape this cold, hard truth, I suppose, was that I had cried in front of them. And some people will reject me because of that. And I understand why they might do that. And also, I was moody. I am moody. And the real problem was that I was ashamed of that. And underneath it all, I felt like I deserved to be rejected, and I believed that I was unlovable. Now, I'm not saying that so you can all feel sorry for me. I'm saying that because there is no way that we are ever going to be able to tolerate rejection if we have a belief like that. But rejection is a part of life. And actually, there's lots of reasons why we can welcome rejection into our life. More of that later. But the only way we can tolerate it is if we believe we're lovable in the first place. So that's what I needed. I needed to have this belief that I was lovable. Great. How on earth do you do that? Well, you can try affirmations. I think we know what Alex thinks about affirmations. And if that works for you, because I'm sure there are some people that use these, if that works for you, fantastic. But it might not, and it didn't work for me. You can try, writing "I am enough" in your favourite lippy on the mirror. That might work. And if it does, that's great. But if you're anything like me, it takes a bit more than a sweep of Chanel to reverse 43 years of ingrained thinking habits. And I'd already learned, because I'd been trying to change my thoughts, it didn't work for me. In fact, all that happened was I felt more of a failure and more angry, and therefore became more moody and was more likely to be rejected. And every time I was rejected, that reinforced my belief that I was unlovable. So that was not working for me. So I didn't really have any faith that it was going to work for me to try and change my beliefs. So I needed a different strategy. And I discovered that if you change your response to the fear, which ultimately drives the belief, you can influence that belief. And ultimately, you can change that belief. And I'm going to share with you how we do that. So, we heard earlier today about fear. And I want to share with you two important things that we need to understand about it. The first thing is that no matter how bad it feels in the moment, every emotion, including fear, is transient. It will pass. So if you do absolutely nothing at all, often the problem will take care of itself. I think that's kind of magic in a way. You don't have to do anything, just tolerate it, and it will diminish. And actually, what I found is that when you stop wrestling with something, it actually passes sooner. So everything is transient, including fear, and we can actually just tolerate it. But the second thing is, we tend to over-egg the things that we are afraid of. And again, we heard earlier on today that there are two main fears that we have. Do you remember what they were? Rejection and failure, absolutely. Question to you. What two fears are we born with? Falling and loud noises. Isn't that interesting that they're different from the two main fears? What does that tell you? They're learned, absolutely. So if you think about it, babies aren't born going, will I ever learn to walk? What happens if I make myself look stupid? And they can't do anything, that's the irony, but they've got no fear. My son is 7 and he's still at that age where he's fearless. And the other day, he was about to cycle out in front of a truck and I had to stop him. And he went, don't worry, Mummy, I know how to commando roll under trucks. Taken his bike off him, obviously. Can have it back when he's 30 and he's learned to be afraid of everything. But that's the point, isn't it? Is we learn to be afraid of things like rejection and failure. We even come up with trendy names for them, don't we? Imposter syndrome, perfectionism, competitiveness, and the worst one of all, FOMO. Man, it's a killer. But the point is that we've learned to be afraid of things that won't kill us, which means we can probably do them anyway and we'll live. So we can apply that. So in my world, what that looks like is I am terrified that if I show up as me, I will be rejected. But I can tolerate it, and it won't kill me. And I can go out there and do what feels right to me in the presence of fear. And when we do that, we have two things. First of all, we start to increase in our confidence. Every time we tolerate an emotion, we go, oh, I'm stronger than I thought. I can tolerate that. That wasn't as bad as I thought. But the second thing that we learn is agency. That is not a laughing matter. But the second thing we learn is agency. I am not hostage to my emotions. I can do what feels right to me in the presence of fear. I'm braver than I thought. And what you're now doing is you're creating evidence for a new belief. And that belief is, I am strong and I am brave. So when we can change how we respond to the fear, we can start to open ourselves up to rejection. And there's a very good reason why we would want to do that. I believe that rejection is actually rather wonderful, and we can reframe how we experience rejection. And I'm going to take you back to Afghanistan to illustrate how I learned this. So, when I was on that final tour, we were assigned a hostage recovery mission. And we were told there was a lady, she was in the hands of the Taliban, and the powers that be were trying to negotiate her release. And if they got the green line, we were going to have to go quickly and go get her out before the Taliban changed their mind. So we were expecting to go at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I briefed my crews and I sent them to bed for a good night's sleep. At midnight, I got a call to say, that's not going to happen before 10 p.m. tomorrow night. So I knew we were looking at a long day. And in the flying world, we have crew duty rules because it's been proven that if you've been on shift for a long time, your errors go up. So I had to think quite carefully about what to do. Now, I could have woken them up in the middle of the night and said, go back to sleep, but have a lie-in. But I decided I was going to keep them in their beds and accept that they would have a long day the next day in the knowledge that they'd had a good night's rest. So when they came back in the next morning, I briefed them that this was the plan. And most people accepted that with no problem at all. But two people, I'm going to call them Bill and Ben, they got really upset about this. And they said, well, this is outrageous. What do you expect us to do all day? And I said, I don't really care. We've got a hostage to go and get. Now, I couldn't have done that if I hadn't been able to reject them and accept that they might reject me back. And they did. They grumbled about it for a long time, and I know that made me unpopular. So rejection is actually essential if we want to lead in accordance with our values and do the right thing in that moment. And I don't regret for 1 second that I rejected them and they rejected me. Now, maybe that's pretty instinctive. I'm sure there is nobody here in this room that would go, sorry, hostage, not coming for you. Of course, we want to go and do the right thing, don't we? So maybe that's not particularly surprising. But what I think is just as important is that they needed to reject me. Because there is no point sending 6 people to die to try and save 1. And I had to know that I wasn't compromising the safety of my crews by sending them on a mission at the end of a long day. And the only way that I could be confident that I was making the right decision was if I knew they would say no to me. If they had that psychological safety. So I had to know that they would say no. And I did know that. So I don't regret that I rejected them, but I don't regret that they rejected me. And I actually see rejection is absolutely essential, both in leadership and in followership, so that we can make ethical decisions under pressure. And I'm proud of all of us for the way we conducted ourselves. So that's the first thing about rejection. But the second thing that I learned was that the way we respond to rejection can actually be really nourishing for relationships. So on the same detachment, there was a guy whose wife was due to give birth to their first child. And the due date was about when we were due to get home from Afghanistan. And I said to my boss at the time, I'd like to send this guy home a few weeks early so he can be with his wife for the last few weeks. I know that's what he'd want. It is what guys want, isn't it? To be with their wives in the last 3 weeks. Anyway, he agreed this was the right thing. He wanted to try and get home. And my boss said to me, no way. You are way too soft on your people. You're like a mother to them. He is a military man. He will go back home on the day he is due and not a day earlier. And I said, no, I disagree. And it's not because I'm soft. Okay, I'm a bit, do sometimes cry. But it's actually because in the military, and maybe in your businesses, we rely hugely on people performing on their A game every day, sometimes at considerable personal sacrifice in difficult situations. And people perform better when they know they're valued. So if I can communicate this person's value to him by sending him home a couple of weeks early, then I'm going to do that. But also in the military, and maybe this is true in your businesses too, we rely hugely on the goodwill and support of the friends and family of those people who do that job every day. We couldn't do what we do without them. So they have extraordinary value to us. And if I can communicate that value to the friends and family by sending this guy home a few weeks early, then I'll do that. And that's what I did. I sent him home early. And do you know who it was who I sent home? Bill. It was Bill, our chief protagonist in our hostage story. And what I was really thrilled to learn was that even though he had publicly rejected me and I had publicly rejected him, that did not diminish his value to me in any way. And what I was also thrilled to learn was that I was more than happy for him to know that. So I think that when you give someone permission to reject you, that's actually a sign of respect, because what you're saying is, my opinion of you isn't based on whether or not you agree with me. What you're saying is, I value you even when you say no. And I value you even when I say no. And I can't think of a greater compliment that you can give to someone, actually. So I think far from weakening a relationship, I think strong relationships thrive when we have the ability to say no and be told no. So it turns out that rejection, just like fear, is neither as awful nor as permanent as we might have thought. And when it's possible to reframe our relationship with rejection, we can start to see it not as an expression of our personal worth or lack of, but actually what it is, which is, in this precise moment, my needs and values don't align with yours. And I think that's okay, isn't it? And when I think back to when I felt rejected and when I felt most wounded by rejection, that makes sense to me because it was during a time of need. I needed that trusted agent to be kind to me, but for whatever reason, what they needed didn't align with what I needed. And I don't really know why, but I do know that it doesn't make me a monster, and it doesn't make them one either. Now, of course, if it's a conflict in values, we might be talking about a more permanent friction in a relationship, which is for a whole other discussion. But the point is that when we can move past this requirement to take rejection as a personal attack, we can start to see it as an insight into our needs and values. And that's when you know that your relationship has changed with rejection, because you're no longer saying, what does that mean about me? And you're using it to understand other people better and to grow. And that's a great place to be. I am really looking forward to that day. But we can move towards that place by changing our response to the fear of rejection. Because everything is transient. So if you do absolutely nothing at all but tolerate it, it will pass. And every time you tolerate that fear, you are getting more confident in your ability to sit with difficulty. And every time you go out and do what feels right to you in the presence of fear, you're growing in confidence. And you're starting to feel braver. And one day, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but not too far from now, you'll wake up and you'll realize that you have a new belief. And it will sound something like this: I am enough. And when you have that, it's not so much that you're fearless, it's actually better than that. You have self-belief. So I'm going to leave you with a question. In fact, I'm going to leave you with a call to arms. Will you give yourself permission to tolerate your biggest fear and to go and do what feels right to you in the presence of that fear so that you can live your full potential and feel awesome? Thank you for listening.